The Galactic Archaeological Commission's laboratory hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced xenotechnology. Ruby Chen stood at her workstation, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display rotating before her. The double helix structure glowed an ethereal blue, its sequence mapping out in real time as the quantum processors decoded millennia-old genetic material. "Dr. Zathon," Ruby called out, not looking away from her work, "you're going to want to see this." The Valorian scientist shuffled over on his 6 articulated legs, his translucent carapace reflecting the laboratory's bioluminescent lighting. Dr. Zathon had spent 40 standard years studying extinct species across the galaxy, but the excitement in the human's voice made his antenna quiver with anticipation. "What have you discovered, Ruby?" His voice emanated from the translation device mounted on his thorax, converting his native clicks and whistles into standard galactic. "We've successfully extracted viable DNA from the Mars colony ruins. Site 17, the one buried under Olympus Mons." Ruby's fingers danced across the haptic interface, pulling up comparison charts. "The sample is approximately 12,000 Earth years old, possibly older. Pre-Exodus era." Zathon's compound eyes widened. The pre-Exodus era was legendary, a time when humans had first ventured beyond Earth, before the great scattering that had sent humanity spreading across the stars like seeds on stellar winds. Finding intact genetic material from that period was unprecedented. "Remarkable," Zathon breathed. "This could rewrite our understanding of early human colonization efforts. The genetic markers should tell us about the original Martian settlers, their origins, perhaps even—" "Actually," Ruby interrupted, leaning closer to the display with a frown creasing her forehead. She tapped a sequence, highlighting several genetic markers. "These markers are unusually familiar." Bennett Rodriguez chose that moment to enter the lab, carrying 3 containers of what humans called coffee, a stimulant beverage that most other species found mildly toxic. He was the team's xenoarchaeology specialist, having spent the last 5 years cataloging human artifacts across former colony worlds. "Morning, everyone," Bennett said cheerfully, distributing the drinks. He handed one to Ruby, who accepted it without looking away from her screen. "What are we staring at today?" "Ancient DNA from Mars," Ruby murmured. She took a sip of coffee, then froze. Her eyes darted between the display and Bennett, then back again. "Bennett, didn't you do that heritage DNA test last year, the comprehensive one?" "Yeah, for my grandmother. She wanted to trace our family back to the original Earth nations." He shrugged. "Why?" Ruby's fingers flew across the interface. "Because I need you to pull up your genetic profile, right now." Something in her tone made both Bennett and Zathon move closer. Bennett accessed his personal files through his neural implant, projecting his genetic sequence into the shared workspace. The laboratory's AI immediately began running comparison algorithms. The match was instantaneous. "What the—" Bennett stared at the overlapping sequences, color-coded markers aligning with 98% accuracy. That's my DNA." "In a 12,000-year-old sample?" Zathon's antenna drooped in confusion. "This is impossible. The probability of such a match is—" "Wait," Ruby said, holding up a hand. Her mind was racing through possibilities. "Bennett, your family history. Didn't you say your ancestors were part of the early Mars colonization programs?" Bennett nodded slowly, his coffee forgotten in his hand. "My grandmother always said we had Mars blood. I thought she was being poetic. She claimed her great-great-something grandfather was part of the first permanent settlement wave back in the 2080s. But records from that era are fragmentary at best. Most were lost during the solar system wars." Apparently, she wasn't exaggerating. Ruby pulled up the excavation site data. Site 17 was theorized to be one of the original habitat modules. "If your ancestor lived there, worked there," she trailed off, pulling up contamination protocols. Understanding dawned on Bennett's face. "Oh, oh no. Oh yes," Ruby said, fighting back a laugh despite the archaeological implications. "Skin cells, hair follicles, probably saliva from drinking containers. Humans shed genetic material constantly. Your ancestor literally left pieces of himself all over that colony." Zathon looked between the two humans, his confusion deepening. "I do not understand the source of your amusement. This is a significant finding." "It's significant," Bennett agreed, running a hand through his dark hair. "But it's also kind of embarrassing. We just spent 6 months, countless resources, and the GAC's entire quantum sequencing array to analyze DNA that I could have given you with a cheek swab." Ruby couldn't contain her laughter anymore. "We treated it like an invaluable archaeological treasure. We had a whole ceremony when the sample arrived. You gave a speech about the sacred nature of ancient genetic material." "In my defense," Bennett said, his face reddening, "I didn't know it was probably mine." Zathon was slowly processing the situation. In his decades of archaeological work, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. Most species he studied had been extinct for millions of years, their genetic lines long terminated. The idea that a direct descendant could be standing in the same room as their ancestor's DNA sample was unprecedented. "Humans are remarkably persistent," he observed, a note of wonder in his synthesized voice. "Your species spreads across the galaxy, survives catastrophes, and maintains genetic continuity across millennia. This is humbling." Ruby sobered slightly, looking at the matched sequences with new appreciation. "When you put it that way, it is pretty incredible. Bennett, your family line survived the collapse of the first Mars colonies, the solar system wars, the Great Exodus, and 12,000 years of human expansion across known space. That's not just persistence, that's remarkable endurance." Bennett stared at the glowing helices, seeing them differently now. "My grandmother always said we were survivors. Guess she was right about that too." "So," Ruby said, arching an eyebrow, "do we publish our findings?" "Ancient DNA discovered to belong to lab technician's ancestor doesn't exactly make for a compelling paper title." "We publish," Bennett decided, "but maybe we emphasize the genetic continuity aspect, how human family lines can be traced across vast timescales. Make it about the bigger picture." Zathon's antenna perked up. "And perhaps include protocols for checking modern human genetic databases before extensive analysis of historical samples. For efficiency." Ruby grinned. "Very diplomatic, Doctor." As they began documenting their findings, Bennett couldn't help but smile. Somewhere in the ancient Martian dust, his ancestor had lived, worked, and carelessly shed the genetic material that would eventually identify him across the vast gulf of time. It was absurd, touching, and utterly human. "Hey, Ruby," he said suddenly. "Yeah? Next time we find ancient human DNA, maybe check my family tree first?" Her laughter echoed through the laboratory, joined by Zathon's clicking approximation of amusement. In the grand scope of galactic archaeology, sometimes the most profound discoveries were also the most personal, and occasionally the most amusing. The ancient DNA sample continued to glow on the display, a luminous bridge between past and present, a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to be forgotten.